I was really put off by some wording on like page 16 of BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF filing. They said, hypothetically, if there were a hard fork on Bitcoin, we are under no obligation to choose the most economic chain. That's a direct quote from BlackRock. I think it's really interesting that we're watching 3 exponential trends unfold today. The number of Bitcoin users has grown from literally 0 to potentially hundreds of millions, depending upon how you measure it, over the past 15 years. That's an exponential trend that's going parabolic. We're seeing something similar in geographic sovereignty. So the number of digital nomads has grown from 4 million to 35 million since 2018. So this was kind of slowly growing for 10 years. And then if you also have a look at the trend of people quitting the 9 to 5 and starting their own business, this has also started to go exponential in the past 10 years as well. So I believe there's 3 exponential trends, and to become fully self-sovereign, you need to have a foot in each one of those doors.
Welcome back to Your Bitcoin Story podcast, where we explore the incredible journeys of those who have leaped deep down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. I'm your host, Gigi, and today we have the pleasure of being joined by none other than Luke Mikic. As an accomplished artist, entrepreneur, and the face of 3 popular YouTube channels, Luke is truly a digital renaissance man, which is actually the title of his book, which he's currently writing. Luke has gained a widespread recognition in the Bitcoin community for his energetic and educational content. But today we have the pleasure of hearing how this all came to be. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into this fascinating episode as we explore Luke's journey with Bitcoin and his thoughts on its future. Luke, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for the very well researched and very kind introduction there. You've actually been thinking more about my book recently than me. I forgot I was writing that book, but there you have it. I am writing that book, and I'm excited to be talking to you today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Luke. Well, I like to do my research before the podcast. So Luke, like with all episodes, take us back to your beginnings of where does your Bitcoin rabbit hole journey begin?
Yeah, so that begins 2017. I can still remember the first time I heard about Bitcoin explicitly. I was driving to the job that I hated so much. I was in the 9 to 5 rat race, and somebody were talking about this magic internet money that just doubled in price in a week. And I was like, what? There's these, as Preston Pish calls them, magic Mario coins that are worth 10,000 Australian dollars, and now they're worth 20,000 Australian dollars. What is this? I remember I pulled over my car on the highway and I was just listening to this person on the radio talk about digital Bitcoin. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. First time I heard about it. Then I did like a 2-week deep dive on Bitcoin, and I learned enough at the time to figure out that I was going to quit university. I was studying a double major in maths and chemistry at the time because I didn't know if I wanted to be an engineer or a doctor. I was 2 years into that. I said, okay, I'm going to have a gap year just to learn more about this Bitcoin thing because it's so interesting. And at the time I had to start a business so that I could have more income, coming in, so that could, fund my obsession with Bitcoin. And yeah, a few weeks went by and I was like, okay, I'm not going back to university next year. And the rest is history. That was 2017. And since then, I've just been obsessing about Bitcoin and economics and geopolitics and everything around, what actually shapes our world for the past, 7 years, probably 12 to 14 to 16 hours a day. And that's essentially the long and the short of my Bitcoin story.
Amazing. Well, I guess you skipped one big leap, which is pinned on your X page, which in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, you broke your lease to live in a van to stack more sats. Tell us more about a little bit more about that, because not every fellow pleb cancels his lease and moves to a van to stack more sats. How did you come around to that?
I love your research. Yeah. So again, I was, when I was at university, I was homeless. So I moved out of home when I was 16. I got out of my, let's say, parental living environment as quick as humanly possible. And so I was very short on money. I had no money when I discovered Bitcoin in 2017. A lot of people would say, oh, Luke, you're lucky. You'd be loaded. You're probably squatting on 20 Bitcoin. I wish, baby. I knew about Bitcoin when it was, $5,000 a coin. I bought a lot of Bitcoin when it was at $3,000 a coin, but I had no money. So what I did in 2018, this was a few months after I learned about Bitcoin. I didn't understand it. Not even close to understand Bitcoin. I don't understand Bitcoin today after 7 years of research, but I understood enough to know about these 4-year cycles. I understood Bitcoin was down by 80%. Historically, that's been a great time to buy Bitcoin. I did the maths. At the time, I just broke up with my first real girlfriend at the time, and I was paying like $300 on a 2-bedroom apartment that I just didn't need. And I was like, what should I do here? I'm paying like 12 grand a year or whatever the maths was in rent. I could literally go buy a van for $2,000 tomorrow. And I factored in the petrol costs and all of that. And I said, okay, I'm going to save about $10,000 a year by living in the back of a van. So I did that for about 18 months. And I even swapped from a van to a truck with a big camper on the back of it. It looked so ridiculous. So ridiculous. All my friends called me nuts in 2018. I was living in the winters in the back of a van in Australia, in Tasmania. Now, for those who don't know, that's the coldest part of Australia. And in the winter, it gets down to -3 degrees Celsius. So I
Oh,
remember
wow.
waking up in the back of my van and I had like condensation on my nose. It wasn't frostbite and it wasn't an icicle yet, but it was like, it was the beginnings of like frostbite in the middle of winter. But I understood how revolutionary Bitcoin could be pretty early on. And that was the price I paid for about 18 months there. I stacked a lot more Bitcoin than I otherwise would have. I literally lived on a diet of 70 cents loaf breads in Australia. So you could get these loaves of bread that were white, they were terrible, and for less than $1. And I used to live on that and like 8 cans of tuna that were, swimming in seed oils and all sorts of other garbage. I lived on that for years just because I was trying to stack as much Bitcoin as possible. So I do meet a lot of people today who say, look, I just can't buy Bitcoin. I just don't have enough money to buy Bitcoin. And again, I don't like to share stuff about my personal life too much unless I think it can help other people. And I think a lot of people just have not tried or suffered enough to stack Bitcoin.
I agree. Well, just on that point, I think it's also, it goes to actually a few days ago, we shot an episode with, oh my God, Eric V. Stacks. Sorry for the listeners. It's a bit late here, but we also got into this topic of kind of people complain that they don't have enough, monies to stack or whatnot. And I think it goes back to discipline. I think everybody just is so to say, enticed in this consumerism that they have a bunch of stuff which is irrelevant, which they shouldn't. Maybe you don't have to go to the extremes like Luke and kind of live in a van, right? But I think you don't need 50 t-shirts. You don't need the latest iPhone whenever it comes out. Just be smarter regarding your purchase, your spending habits, and then you can always stack more Bitcoin, right? So I guess it's down to discipline. It plays a big role, but we like to take it easy and kind of not think of the future, which is kind of our monetary system. It's brainwashed us into spending today and not thinking about the future, which kind of brings us to where we are.
Exactly. And it's such a problem that plagues society. And I 100% agree. People don't need to do what I did. Again, I'm a little bit of an edge case. I go 100% into everything in every aspect of my life. So I don't recommend living on a diet of white bread and canned tuna for 2 or 3 or maybe 4 years that I did to stack more Bitcoin, because I don't know what kind of damages that has done to my body. I've been carnivore here for the past 3 or 4 years and I feel infinitely better, and I am certainly
You're
I
looking
certainly less
healthy.
certainly less fat than I was 4 or 5 years ago, which my passport photo proves. So again, I would just encourage everybody to, really have a think about ways you could just stack more Bitcoin. I think just a lot of people are short Bitcoin because they just haven't thought about its potential. So many people think Bitcoin is just going to be a digital gold. It's just going to be worth 200,000 or $100,000 a coin. And I think I just don't think that's likely. I think that's really unlikely. I think it's more likely that Bitcoin fails and goes to zero than it just becoming just another asset class and it's just $500,000 a coin. That could be another rabbit hole we open up. But I think a lot of people are just treating Bitcoin just like another asset, just a speculative risk stock. They just don't understand it at a really deep level, and that's why I think a lot of people aren't making the sacrifices that should be made. Like again, I think I come up with some sort of saying. I said, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but something about like if you can sacrifice for 4 years, or if you can endure poverty for 4 years, your future generations are going to live with prosperity for literally generations. I can't remember the exact quote, but again, that's the opportunity. Like if you can suffer for 4 years and somehow, like British Hodl says, get to 1 Bitcoin, I think so many people are underestimating what that 1 Bitcoin could be worth in the future.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's more kind of Going back to what you mentioned with people can't comprehend the power of Bitcoin, I guess the reason is because there's nothing to compare it to. There is no asset in the digital or the physical realm which has a scarce resource, and in this case, 21 million. And people just think, it's a numbers go up game, and it's all this speculative. Oh, I'll buy it today at 60K. I'll wait for it to get to 150K, and then I'm out. And I tell people, you're out into what? Into fiat? Like you made the leap to like freedom, and then what? You're gonna swing back to more slavery? Like that just doesn't make sense. And I guess it just takes time. People are very going back to discipline. People are just impatient. They want everything yesterday. It's like today, it's like this whole social media demographic of swiping onto the next video. It's kind of like they can't wait 4 years, like telling a Gen Z. I guess you're a Gen Z, right, Luke?
I think I was born in 96, so maybe I'm a millennial.
Okay, so you're like around the verge, but like most Gen Zs today, like they tell them wait for a week, they're like, no way. Like then you tell them like you swing wait for 4 years. It's like wow, like 4 years is an eternity. But at the end of the day, 4 years is not that long. Like time goes like this. So I guess I fully agree with you, Luke. If you just like focus on stacking as hard as you can for a 4 year window, and then if you're disciplined enough to carry on doing it for as long as you can, I mean, you are, as you said, Luke, building generational wealth for your kids, grandchildren, and so forth. Another point I want to bring up with this one Bitcoin, get into one Bitcoin, which people, I totally agree with you on this as well, Luke. They don't comprehend how powerful it is to have a single Bitcoin. They look at, the MicroStrategies of the world and Microplanet, buying thousands of Bitcoin and like, I wish I was there, but like just have your goal of getting first to this quarter, half, 3/4, and then a full Bitcoin. And then you are essentially, you're so well set. Going back to the last episode that I did as well, which Eric was unfamiliar with, and I'll share it again to those who haven't listened to that episode. And if you haven't, go back and do listen to it. But the one thing that we mentioned is the last 35 years of mining Bitcoin. So from the year of 2105, for the last 35 years until 2140, when the last Satoshi will be mined, the whole world will be mining one single Bitcoin. That's 35 years of mining of all the mega farms around the world mining a single Bitcoin. And today you can have it for a mere 60,000. So whenever someone says Bitcoin's overpriced, I can get the next shitcoin, whatever it is, fraction of a cent, I tell them that's not the point. The point is not speculating. It's about preserving your wealth and having the hardest money that has ever been invented and ever will be invented, because there is no take two of Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin's here, and if it fails, there is no redoing it. Now, that being said, hopefully it doesn't fail, because if it fails, then it's going to be a very miserable world too, especially us Bitcoiners that are dedicating so much energy, time, and passion into it. But I think we are well past that point of failing. I guess the 2017 block wars was the big test. And now I think it's, never say never, but I don't think it will fail. What do you think, Luke? You with me?
I don't think Bitcoin will ever fail. So again, I've been influenced a lot by CK Snarks, Christian Corrals, who's now working with the Human Rights Foundation. He said something in an interview with me, like maybe 2022, but it was the first time I heard it, and he said Bitcoin is a binary outcome. It either becomes the new global reserve currency and it demonetizes everything, or it goes to zero. CK started this idea, and he was kind of saying, look, he was the first person who I heard say it anyway, and he said, look, it's very unlikely that Bitcoin just becomes just another asset class, and it's digital gold, and it's $500,000 or $1 million a coin, and you still have, this $300 trillion of grossly over monetized real estate market, and you've got 100 or $200 trillion of fiat money moving around the world. And again, I just 100% agree with that. I think it's far more likely that Bitcoin fails and goes to zero than it's just having some sort of stable value at $1 million a coin. I just don't think that's likely for so many reasons I could jump into. But yeah, I mean, it's just like Bitcoin getting to $500,000 a coin is like the biggest de-risking event we're ever going to see. Like there is, again, I was interviewing someone else. I like to give credit where credit is due, so I'm sorry if I feel like I'm name dropping everyone. But I was interviewing Samson Mao for my podcast, and he said there is like a Veblen threshold. And a Veblen good is a good that becomes more valuable the higher the price of it rises, which is really interesting. Like, for example, this isn't true with most other goods. Most people think, oh, because the price of something is so high, it becomes more risky. But in Bitcoin's fact, it's the opposite. Bitcoin's a Veblen good. The higher the price goes, this means the safer Bitcoin is. Because like you talked about with the mining, this means you got more computers securing the Bitcoin network, trying to mine some of that very rare Bitcoin that is being produced every 10 minutes with the Bitcoin blocks. Okay. So again, Samson introduced this idea of a Veblen threshold where Bitcoin might hit $500,000 a coin or $1 million a coin. And all of a sudden, this unlocks a tidal wave of new capital flooding into Bitcoin because all of a sudden it's big enough for these large capital allocators to allocate to it. And this has been my mental model for a very long time. Very, very long time. Again, like for ages and ages, since I've publicly started talking about Bitcoin, this has been my view on how Bitcoin's going to monetize. Bitcoin is a technology. I expect it to be adopted in an S-curve, an exponential S-curve, like all prior technologies have been adopted. The smartphone, the internet, automobiles, any technology gets adopted in these S-curves. So this idea of a Veblen threshold is really interesting. And I do think that it's somewhere around this 500,000, maybe $1 million per coin. All of a sudden, Microsoft or Amazon, these companies that are sitting on tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars of capital on their balance sheet, once Bitcoin reaches a trillion, or sorry, it's already there. Let's say 5 trillion or $10 trillion a coin, it's all of a sudden big enough for a Microsoft to make a 10% allocation to Bitcoin. And I just think a lot of people, they're not really thinking about what does a $500,000 Bitcoin mean? What does it mean for the world? It means it is the biggest fire alarm in the world that the $300 trillion global real estate market is about to be demonetized by Bitcoin. Bitcoin breaking 6 figures, and I don't know where that Veblen threshold is, but getting above 500K or $1 million a coin, that is not ignorable. If you're somebody who is sitting on a $100 billion bond fund, you are not able to ignore Bitcoin at $1 million a coin. You have to allocate to Bitcoin. And I don't know where that price is, but again, that was probably, I don't even know if that was answering your question, but this is how I'm thinking about. Yeah.
I think just to add to that, like the $1 million mark, I think most people still are denying today that Bitcoin can get to $1 million, and I fully agree with you, Luke. Once it's not if, it's once we get to $1 million, Bitcoin's not just gonna pause and be a stable coin at $1 million. It's going to be going up forever. I truly believe that the more the governments print money, the more that fiat gets devalued. It's like the parallel opposite. Bitcoin gets more value the more the fiat loses value, and fiat's always going to be trending down towards zero. And at what point, like in the future, when we say Bitcoin's worth $1 million, what is the dollar worth? That's the bigger question, which I tell people, don't focus on the Bitcoin. The Bitcoin's always going to be going up, but the actual fiat value, which is losing money all the time, and especially since the pandemic, still, if you need more wake-up calls, I don't know what else you need. Like the fact that we've printed over, well, not we, but this private company called the Fed printed 40% of all dollars in existence in the last 4 years. In its 100-year history, it's kind of mind-blowing, and people just seem to sleep through it.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. Well, some people are waking up at an accelerated rate, but you raise a really good point there about the exponential decay of fiat currency. So this is something else I mentioned in I pretty much wrote like an 8,000 word thesis on how I believe Bitcoin will be adopted via super cycles in 2021. And the argument is all technologies get adopted exponentially, but Bitcoin is rare and unique. It has some characteristics that might slow down its adoption, but it has other characteristics that could speed up its adoption. So Bitcoin's competitor, fiat currency, is getting exponentially worse. And it's advertising a solution to it at an exponential rate. And that is because hyperinflationary events and sovereign fiat currency defaults, they happen in these exponential S-curves. And a lot of people just don't know, and they're not aware that we're at the deleveraging phase of an 80-year long-term debt cycle. Every 80 years, historically, for the past few hundred years, we've gotten into these periods where the world has too much debt, interest rates hit zero, and governments have to default on the enormous amount of debt they own through significant currency debasement and even hyperinflation in some use cases. And that's where we are right now. The US, the global reserve currency, it hit 130% debt to GDP ratio in 2020. And historically, we have a 98.6% probability that the global reserve currency holder will default within 15 years. So before 2035. Again, there's a great report that I always talk about. Hirschman Capital is a hedge fund. They did a report looking back at the past 220 years of economic history, and they showed that 52 countries have hit that 130% debt to GDP ratio. 51 of them defaulted on their debt within 15 years. The only exception is Japan, who has essentially defaulted. The Japanese yen's lost like 40% of its value against the dollar over the past 4 years alone, and the dollar's lost 40% against goods and services over the past 4 years alone. So the yen's lost 70% of its value against goods and services in America in the past 4 years. I classify that as a default. But all those wonky numbers tell you is that once you hit 130% debt to GDP ratio, there's no turning back. You default within 15 years, and every government who has a magic money printer, the default always looks like currency debasement, significant inflation, and the government simply prints a ton of new money, devalues that money, and it pays back its debt with the devalued dollars. That's what a default has looked like every time for the past 220 years. So
And they
again,
never learn.
we never. And never, because a government's never going to say, okay, we have too much debt. We defaulted. Sorry, too much debt. They just don't do that. Governments are not truthful entities. And so that is why I have this accelerated timeline of how quickly Bitcoin could be adopted. We have this S-curve framework, and we also have this framework of how quickly currency debasements and defaults happen once you hit 130% debt to GDP. A lot of people will say, but Luke, America's different. America's the reserve currency. They can't default. Well, I would like to show you the British pound. The British pound has lost 99.9% of its value over the past 300 years, and they were the global reserve currency in the 1800s for 100 years before the US dollar took over. But then I'd also like to remind you, there's a good 10 or 15 other countries around the world who have government debt to GDP ratios above 130%. You have all of the PIGS countries in Europe, Portugal, Italy, Greece, Spain, as well as a number of, all of them. You have a number of other major G20 currencies that are in that debt situation. And because of how globally interconnected the financial system is today, I believe if you have 10 different currencies all going through this default phase, it's going to unwind together. So again, that's kind of, I really like the point you raised about fiat getting exponentially worse, because that's a big part of my framework for why I believe Bitcoin will be adopted a lot quicker than most people think.
I like it. It's kind of logical, I would say. I guess at least to my mind, and I hope to other people as well. You know, it's people often tell me like, how do you get more people to to adopt Bitcoin, and not even adopt, but just like start learning about it? And I say, well, it's very easy. Ask people how do they like their money losing value every single day, and what is the solution for it? It's not, you don't have that magic printer at home. You can't just print an extra stack of dollars or pounds or Japanese yen. You need to figure something out. I know everybody has $1 million to go and put into real estate. I know you're not a fan of real estate, but just as an example, right, of like preserving their wealth at the point in time. But I wanna switch a little bit to what we're talking about now. Here is governments. One thing I want to bring up and have a conversation with you, Luke, is this big, so to say, hype about and trend that people have been talking about for the last 12 to 24 months about nation states adopted Bitcoin and how it's fantastic for Bitcoin. But my take is, before I'll swing the microphone to you, is the whole ethos of Bitcoin is separating the money from the state. And now we're in a position where it's like we're praising that the state is going to adopt Bitcoin and hold Bitcoin on its balance sheet, which actually, Bitcoin, in my eyes, wasn't made for a national bank to be holding on their bank sheet. It's for people to liberate themselves from the system and have, that magic tool in their own hands. So what is your take on nation states adopting and holding Bitcoin on their balance sheets?
I think Satoshi planned everything. Satoshi envisioned absolutely everything that we're seeing today. I think Satoshi knew that the world's largest asset manager, BlackRock, would be FOMOing into Bitcoin. I think that Satoshi knew that nation states would eventually start waking up to Bitcoin. And I even think Satoshi might have nearly predicted the years that these events would have been transpiring. Big claim. I know, really big claim. But Satoshi was always anti-government, anti-banks, anti-big corporations. He was always Bitcoin is a liberty tool. And I think you just simply need to look at the issuance schedule of Bitcoin, and I think you can begin to piece together how Satoshi might have saw Bitcoin's adoption unfolding. So today we have 90+% of all of the Bitcoin that will ever be mined already mined in its first 15 years. And half of the Bitcoin, 10.5 million coins, were mined in the first 4 years, 2009, 10, 11, and 12, which is incredible. That was before the first halving in 2012. I don't know, but I like the idea of thinking that Satoshi knew that the only people who would adopt Bitcoin in the first 10 years were very ideologically driven, hardcore cypherpunks. And again, this Satoshi only first kind of advertised Bitcoin on the mailing list, and there was only like a handful of hardcore cypherpunks. I forget the exact number of people who received that email about Bitcoin on the mailing list, but from memory, it was less than 100. It was like 10, 20, 30 hardcore
Yeah, it was around
cypherpunks.
there.
Yeah, so it wasn't a lot of people. So I think if you kind of piece together all of these things, again, I don't know anything for sure, but I think Satoshi, if you look at the issuance schedule and how Bitcoin was released, I think Satoshi was very aware that eventually we would get governments, nation states, Larry Finks, all adopting Bitcoin eventually. But I think that the fact that we have, 60, 70, 80% of all of the Bitcoin in the hands of ideologically driven people who will not be selling their Bitcoin. I mean, if we just think about the fact that 60% of the Bitcoin hasn't moved in the past 3 years, despite all of the volatility, all of the scares, all of the attacks, all of the FTXs, all of the, the China banning Bitcoin, all of the crap that we've survived over the past 3 years, with all of the volatility, Bitcoin going from 5K to 28K to 69K to 15K to back up to 60K, and we got 60% of the Bitcoin hasn't moved in 3 years, with all of the fights, all of the attacks. I think that screams volumes that a lot of the Bitcoin is in the hands of people who will not be selling it if we see hypothetical attacks in the future, like a 6102. This is the biggest reason that people are scared and wary of BlackRock and nation states now trying to accumulate as much Bitcoin as they can. They're worried about them trying to accumulate a ton of coins and then trying to create some sort of hard fork where they have the economic majority of that chain and they try to change Bitcoin forever. I think that's what people are scared of. Again, Bitcoin's not a proof of stake protocol, so it doesn't matter how much Bitcoin any individual actor has. But I think that's the attack vector people are afraid of. And I'm just personally a little bit more optimistic that so much Bitcoin is in the hands of ideologically driven people. And I just don't think it's likely that a BlackRock or a US government or a Chinese government is able to accumulate like a meaningful amount of supply that would have me worried in the event of a hard fork. I'm not a technically driven person. I don't have any technical chops in Bitcoin. I don't know exactly how a hard fork would look like or how much Bitcoin we need to be in the hands of ideologically driven people if there is a very controversial hard fork in the future. But I just don't see these potentially bad faith actors getting more than 20, 30, 40% of the Bitcoin, which I think has me a little bit more optimistic. And I just think it's destiny. If Bitcoin is going to be the new reserve currency, it has to be adopted by nation states and governments and banks and Larry Fink. And this is just the biggest signal that we have won. They first tried to attack us with the China bans Bitcoin mining. Weeks later, Elon Musk, the world's richest man, comes out and says, oh, Bitcoin's dirty. I'm not accepting it for payment, but I'm not selling my Bitcoin. Again, very interesting. Nobody ever pieced those two things together. And then you obviously have the frazzly-haired ADHD clown, Sam Bankman-Fried, shorting Bitcoin and working with the government and the Democrats, trying to suppress the price of Bitcoin under 20K by naked shorting 80,000 coins. And at the same time, we've got the World Economic Forum and BlackRock going on this anti-ESG agenda, saying Bitcoin's dirty, we need proof of stake. Look at all the articles the WEF was writing about proof of stake and Ethereum and Bitcoin back in 2021 and 2022. We've been under attack from the past 3 years. And the fact that all of these entities have now backflipped and are now openly embracing Bitcoin, I think that's the signal to show that we've won.
I like it. Yeah. The way you've put it, it's kind of them embracing it, quote unquote, towards the end, right? Once most coins have already been minted and have been put out to the market, and the majority being held by the true cypherpunks, the self-sovereign individuals, it doesn't really matter. Like they can't have that much influence on it. And even if they have a hard fork in the future, I guess the node runners decide which code they want to run, right? And putting in their vote. So even if they want to fork off like Roger did, and we've seen how many different hard forks over the years with Bitcoin, I guess people can still choose what is their true Bitcoin and the Bitcoin that we have today. I don't know extensively what should be changing it. I guess there's always tweaks to improve it, but the way Bitcoin is today, it's kind of, if you could say so, perfect. So there's no reason to be going off tangent, but we'll see what will happen. And with all these ETFs, I totally agree. It's brought over like the more legitimacy to it, and there's a lot of more like family offices and like big like financial corporations that are really considering getting Bitcoin, because the BlackRocks, the Fidelities, and everybody have their own ETFs out there. But to be honest, like I don't really like the ETF, because ETF is just paper Bitcoin. It's essentially it's like trading Forex. It's a CFD, contract for difference. Like I've allocated this much shitcoin dollars for this much Bitcoin. Someone's holding it, probably Coinbase, but I don't know. I can't verify nothing. It's I feel like, and we've had this over the last few weeks actually, and I've been talking about this from the beginning of the year when, pre-ETFs being launched. I said at some point there's going to be a scandal where, I don't know if majority or at least one or two of these ETF holders are not going to have the Bitcoin. They're just going to be selling paper Bitcoin, because these big institutions have been doing dirty business ever since they were incepted. Wall Street's all about dirty money and deals under the table. But with Bitcoin, it's a little bit hard. And I always said, like having on-chain, footprint, it's very hard to do things under the table. But I think for an exception of one or two ETFs, I think it's ARK and another institution, nobody discloses their public address, and we know nothing what's actually happening. What's your take on that, Luke? Do you think BlackRock and the rest of the big ETF boys are selling paper Bitcoin, or they're following the guidebook?
Jeez, you just opened up a can of worms for me, my friend. So BlackRock, I'll give you the full, I'm really sorry, I can't give short answers on podcasts. So I'll try to keep this as brief as possible, but I've got a lot of thoughts about paper Bitcoin because I've been thinking about it for a very long time. The day after BlackRock announced their Bitcoin ETF filing from memory, it was July 2023. I released a tweet thread on Twitter. It went very viral. I think it got like 6,000 likes and like millions of views. So mega viral for the Bitcoin space. And I was really put off by some wording on like page 16 of BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF filing. They said, hypothetically, if there were a hard fork on Bitcoin, we are under no obligation to choose the most economic chain. That's a direct quote from BlackRock. And I was like, what the I really started like thinking about things. I was like, hang on a minute. And again, I wrote this whole tweet thread. I showed what BlackRock said. And I said, are they trying to create an ESG fork of Bitcoin in the future, where obviously a green Bitcoin that is censoring transactions, that is not an economic chain. They are only allowing transactions that are green and proof of stake friendly and, environmentally friendly, and no criminals allowed. That is my idea of what an uneconomic chain might look like. Because in Bitcoin, there's no censorship on Bitcoin. You pay a higher fee, your transaction gets into a block, irrespective of who you are or where those coins are coming from. That's how the Bitcoin protocol works. It's uncensorable. It's fuck you money. I apologize for swearing. I'm Australian.
No, you can.
It's FU
It's a
money.
plus
That's what
15 podcast.
beautiful. That's good. I hope no kids are listening to my foul language at home. So I noted all of that. Literally the day after BlackRock did their ETF filing, I drew all of the dots. I said Larry Fink from BlackRock is a content director for the World Economic Forum. He's written articles talking about ESG. I drew all the dots. I said, the World Economic Forum's connected to Larry. They're all about ESG and proof of stake and green stuff. They're all bashing Bitcoin. So that's been my viewpoint from day one. It's inevitable. Inevitable. I think there's a higher probability than most people believe that BlackRock could be attacking Bitcoin. A lot of people say, but Luke, they're just acting in their best interest. They're just trying to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible. I think that's likely. Don't get me wrong. Everything's a probability. Nothing's a certainty. I don't know what the future holds, but I think there's a higher probability than most people think that BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF is a planned, coordinated attack on Bitcoin that will materialize in the future once they have, they've brought in so much coins that could be a honeypot. I think it's a much higher probability than most people think. Off the top of my head, probably think it's maybe a 10 or 20 or maybe 30% probability that we do see a BlackRock attack. And I do also think that there's a higher probability that we're watching a paper Bitcoin attack right now, and the price of Bitcoin is being suppressed by these enormous exchanges like Coinbase. Again, people call me a nutcase, but I've been screaming about paper Bitcoin with FTX. I never trusted FTX from the beginning. Why should we? How could we trust this $60 billion empire from some clearly drug-addled ADHD boy who is, again, nothing against the man. What's his ideas? In 2021 and 2022, he was saying we need to solve Bitcoin. Proof of stake is the solution. It's like, no, it's not. To say that, you don't understand Bitcoin. We've lived under proof of stake money for 6,000 years. That's the problem. People with the biggest stake can change the rules of the protocol. We have rulers, and then we have the middle and the lower class. That's how money has operated for 6,000 years. If somebody can corrupt the money supply because they have a bigger stake, they're richer, whether they are governments who can print money, whether they are bankers who can print money, whether they are emperors who can cut the corners off gold coins or silver coins, it doesn't matter who they are. We've had rulers for the past 6,000 years of monetary history. Bitcoin, through using proof of work, created the first monetary system in human history that is governed by rules, and it has no rulers. So as soon as Sam Bankman-Fried was saying proof of stake's a solution, we need a green Bitcoin, proof of work is bad, it's like, that's your first red flag that this guy is not only clueless, but he's probably a known operative working with a government to actively suppress Bitcoin. I was screaming this in 2021, 2022. And then when FTX blew up, everybody's like, okay, you're right about that, but you're wrong about Coinbase creating paper Bitcoin today, Luke. I disagree. I've probably made 3 videos about Coinbase and paper Bitcoin and BlackRock in the past month because it has been very popular and in the news recently. We all know that Coinbase doesn't have to publish their reserves publicly. BlackRock also doesn't have to do that publicly. There was a lot
Which
of
is
stir on
crazy.
Twitter. Yeah.
No, on an open ledger. Like, that's the whole thing that underpins Bitcoin, that it's open ledger, that everybody can verify it. And these big holders like Coinbase and BlackRock do not disclose it. Like, that should be a red flag. Like, I don't know what's a bigger red flag, no? Like, if you
The
really
biggest
have
red
it,
flag.
what are you hiding?
Exactly. The biggest red flag. It can only give you positive results. If you publish your reserves, people trust you more and they're going to give you more money. And if you are hypothetically just creating a Bitcoin ETF to get as much money as possible, this is the argument, this is the perception amongst the, let's say, more the Bitcoiners
Skeptical.
who aren't into conspiracy theories. They're saying, oh, but look, no, I mean, BlackRock's just in it for their economic gain. Well, if they are, why do they not just publish their reserves? They would get more money. They would get more economic gain. If there wasn't something shady going on, why doesn't Coinbase and BlackRock just be open, public? They're going to get more. They're going to get more. They're going to get more business. So the conclusion.
And another thing is, like, with the influx of money, right? Since we've seen how many, like, not even tens, it's hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin that have been purchased by the ETF companies. price hasn't really moved anywhere. It's been at this like it's K gang forever, Laura. Like it didn't move off this K. And if you look at the on-chain data, like there isn't that much coins like being moved. Like there's in comparison to what's being sold to us, it's essentially it's ash being transferred, small UTXOs, but not like hundreds or thousands of Bitcoin at a time. So my question was always, where are they getting this Bitcoin? And then people would say, oh, but it's OTC deals. And I'm like, like what whale is going to be selling tens of thousands of Bitcoin at these price points? Like if they've been holding for a decade, they're not stupid to be, and especially selling it to ETFs. So I don't know. Like I have a very bad feeling that at some point, I don't know, is it going to be in 2 months, in 3 months, in a year, in 5 years? At some point, it's going to hit the fan when the truth will come out, and these ETF big boys will be left with their pants around their ankles, and it'll be revealed that the emperor wears no clothes. Like there is no Bitcoins on under their belt. And then I guess we'll see a big black swan event like we've seen with the FTXs and everything else, when, oh no, Bitcoin, we'll see one of those Bitcoin is dead again memes, right? But then, what does that mean? Price plummets. We maxis are happy because we're getting Bitcoin on a discount. And then before you know it, poof, we're back up and back on our trajectory to growth. So, but yeah, it's interesting what will happen out of this and how quickly these news will come out.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned something really interesting there, the price. So there's all these rumors about BlackRock and Coinbase, not publishing their reserves about 3 weeks ago. And then Coinbase and BlackRock amended their custody agreement, which is really interesting.
I saw that, 12-hour withdrawal, right?
Yeah. And I mean, like, this came after there was a lot of speculation. And then coincidentally, the price of Bitcoin ripped from 8K to 6K in like literally the 3 days after they amended that custody agreement and after they had a lot of, let's say, heat put on them. So again, just coincidences. I've seen some people do on-chain research trying to claim that yes, BlackRock is buying Bitcoin. They've even identified what they believe could be BlackRock's addresses. So again, I'm not saying that I think there's 100% probability we have paper Bitcoin and BlackRock has no Bitcoin. I don't know, but I just encourage people to be asking more questions. And that's what I like to do in my content. Just, again, think about how things could be going great and how things could be going wrong. Far too many people are just trusting these institutions like BlackRock and Coinbase who do not have a history of should be trusted. We should not trust either of these people as far as you could throw them.
Yeah, and just to top it off, as the great Andres Antonopoulos quoted, framed, not your keys, not your coins. Like the whole point of Bitcoin is to take control into your hands, no matter if you're a company, if you're an individual, if you're a nation state. Custodying your coins with someone else, there's always a risk of either getting rugged or simply that custodial is lying to you. They don't have your coins. I guess the takeaway from here for all the listeners is always keep your coins off exchanges and off brokerage accounts, because you never know when shit hits the fan. And I still find it crazy that there's still so many coins on exchanges. I guess it's the degen traders that need them there to be playing the psychotic game that they're playing. But the average person, like, I find it crazy that in some countries, like in India and Africa, like, unfortunately, some people are using the Binances of the world like their bank account, and then suddenly their account gets restricted, and they're like, "Oh my god, how can this happen?" And they're sending tickets to customer support. But you shouldn't be holding any money on these exchanges in the first place. If anything, you deposit money there, you buy your Bitcoin, you withdraw all in one transaction. You don't even leave it overnight, and then just keep it as your kind of on and off ramp. Even though I'm not promoting it, there's much better ways for listeners to get it, such as HODL and other non-KYC P2P platforms where you can get your Bitcoin. But if you still want to kind of get it the easy way with your debit card, that's still kind of the norm today. But it's crazy that we're in 2024 and we've seen FTXs and so many exchanges collapse, and still people custody their coins on exchanges. Which, how do we get them, Luke, to go into self-custody? It's not even that hard. Like nowadays, cold storage, it's so simple, yet people are kind of reluctant to pull the trigger. How do we get around that hurdle?
This is a hurdle that's close to my heart because I've pretty much dedicated my life to just talking shit about Bitcoin on YouTube. And I think the number one reason that's going to burn so many people in the future, it purely comes down to education. And I think, like, on YouTube right now, Bitcoin YouTubers, we're getting our asses absolutely kicked. Everybody, if you look at the amount of views the crypto channels get, or the shitcoin channels, or the trading channels get, they're absolutely kicking Bitcoin YouTubers' ass. So my job, outside of not only making like maybe 10 or 11 videos a week for the 3 YouTube channels that I post content to, but my job is helping Bitcoin only YouTube channels increase their social media presence, because we are failing so hard. Like, I've got a thesis, and it is, we are winning the battle, but we are losing the war as Bitcoin only, let's say, propaganda spreaders. That's what we are. We're spreading Bitcoin propaganda, trying to encourage people to avoid being a part of the next big rug pull. FTX, BlockFi, Celsius, they were era 1. Era 2 rug pulls are going to be massive. They're going to be $100 billion rug pulls. And I just think, like, so many Bitcoiners, even all of the big podcasts in the space, they just do so many things wrong for YouTube. Like, YouTube has an algorithm. You need to game that algorithm. And if you title your YouTube video Self-Sovereign Computing 101, nobody's going to watch that video. It's going to get 100 views from your diehard fans, but absolutely nobody is going to watch it. Okay. It's like, on YouTube, Bitcoiners don't understand that, like, 60% of your video's views are going to come from the title and thumbnail packaging. So again, that's a different rabbit hole, but I think the way to, actually help people take self-custody is just educating them about Bitcoin. Like, if I make a 20-minute video highlighting all of the shady things that BlackRock and Coinbase do, I know for a fact that some people watching that video take action, because people will go and buy a Bitcoin-only hardware wallet that I recommend them to buy. Or people will go and actually stamp their Bitcoin backup words on some titanium. Stampseed, baby. There's lots of great products. I'm obviously personally biased because Stampseed sponsored me, but you need to back up your Bitcoin on titanium or even stainless steel. So many people just, don't take action. But I think education is the way that we get people to self-custody their Bitcoin correctly. And again, like, if I made a video tomorrow talking about how to back up your Bitcoin correctly using titanium and a Bitcoin hardware wallet, do you know how many people are going to click on that video? 0. Maybe 100 people. I'll get 100 views, right? Most YouTube channels get stuck in the 50 to 500 view purgatory. And they never get past that 500 view purgatory because they can't make their videos appeal to a wider audience. But if I make a video saying, exposing the paper Bitcoin potential plot between the world's largest asset manager and the world's largest exchange, and put a photo of Larry Fink and Brian Armstrong on the thumbnail, that video will consistently get 10,000 views. And if I teach people about self-custody in that video that's packaged correctly, all of a sudden you've got 10,000 people hearing the message about self-custody, as opposed to the 50 people who might have clicked on my video that was packaged terribly for YouTube. So again, I think it all comes down to just simply educating people. But if you're going to be an educator or try to teach people about Bitcoin publicly, you also need to know how to package your Bitcoin content and your Bitcoin message based upon what platform you're posting to. They're all different. And so many people think, okay, I've got a Bitcoin podcast. I'm going to do the exact same thing on the Bitcoin podcast that I do on YouTube. And that just doesn't work. No, it just does not work. So many people do, like, episode 124 with Safedina Moose. They make that the title of their YouTube video. And sure, it works on podcasting feeds, but it's never going to work on YouTube because there's a completely different algorithm and a completely different audience you're trying to target. Again, that's a different rabbit hole. I could talk about YouTube for an hour, so I'll shut up about that stuff. But I think to answer your question, it all comes down to education. And if you're going to educate people, you just need to frame your argument, which is a objectively better argument. Bitcoiners have a objectively better argument than the shitcoiners, but we are not packaging it in a better format or a better package than the shitcoiners are on YouTube, which is why we are winning the battle but losing the war when it comes to Bitcoin education.
I like it. Well, nice lengthy answer to that one. I was looking for like a quick shout out, and you took us down on a rabbit hole. No, but I appreciate it. Maybe my 2 cents on the YouTube game. For sure, like, it's a beast of its own. I'm also kind of trying to navigate it myself, because I've been predominantly just a podcast only channel, and until April this year it was only audio. Gigi was like Satoshi. Nobody knew what Gigi looked like because my whole idea was, it's not about me, the host, it's about the guests and sharing their stories. And because I'm a one-man team, I do everything. I was like, no, video editing on top of everything. Like I was like, that's too much. But then I got a lot of people telling me, we would love to see some of these, videos on YouTube. Why don't you do YouTube? And then I got pushed down it. And then I realized quickly that, yeah, YouTube, you can't do the same strategy that you do for the other podcasts. And I guess you need that help. So, to anyone listening that has their own, Bitcoin content and is trying to really grasp the YouTube game, then Luke is a perfect person to reach out to and kind of get the grips and get the guidance and, get the tools to help you push it forward. Because, it's a beast of its own. But going back to essentially your journey, I wanted to bring up another point and hear, how did you get about to, and like I just did at the beginning of this podcast, remind you about your book, The Digital Renaissance Man. How did that come around? How come you're writing the book? And kind of what's the timeline with that? Do you have like a set date? Do you want to finish it by end of the year, or it's like an ongoing project where this, and I guess that's your first book, right? You haven't written any other books before apart from lengthy essays.
Yeah, so thank you for the kind words. That's a funny question you ask. Right now, the Digital Renaissance Man book, that's actually probably like 45,000 words deep. But I have another book that I started in like 2020 called, Bitcoin is the Economic Singularity. And that's like 65,000 words deep. The only problem is, like maybe a year or so ago, I kind of like ditched that. I haven't ditched it. I'll come back to it one day, but because I haven't seen anyone explain the thesis of the book yet. So I'm going to eventually have to publish it. I just don't have the time. And I've kind of switched. Like I started as a writer in Bitcoin in 2020 and 2021, predominantly writing. I was, I worked with Mark Moss, helping him with YouTube scripts and emails and writing for like 2 years. But then I found personally, I think I can reach more people with video. So that's a long way of me saying I've got 2 books that are, collectively 100,000 words deep. I think the nomading book will be first. I want to try to publish that. Man, I mean, geez, I keep telling myself in the next 3 months, but right now I'm just fully focused on YouTube. I make like 10 videos a week. So it's like a live stream a day plus some video. Some days I'm doing 2 live streams. So right now I'm focused on video. The thesis of the digital plus podcasts, plus everything, plus interviews, plus 9 employees I'm trying to manage. It's a shit show. So so the book, The Digital Renaissance Man, it's like an evolution of my journey in Bitcoin. Because originally I thought fix the money, fix the world. Bitcoin is going to fix literally every problem. Bitcoin is going to give you all the sovereignty in the world. All you have to do is fully save in Bitcoin. And I learned in 2020 very quickly that there's different aspects of sovereignty or becoming a digital Renaissance man. So the Renaissance men of the original Renaissance, 400 years ago, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, they were specialists in multiple different disciplines. So they were very smart in lots of different things. And that's where I got the idea for the digital Renaissance man, because I think there are multiple different disciplines you need to succeed in or excel in if you want to become fully sovereign. So a lot of people think, me in particular, in 2020, I thought I was as sovereign as any other person on planet Earth. Right? I was 100% all in Bitcoin. My Bitcoin was backed up. I had multi-signature, so nobody could just come to my home and steal my Bitcoin. All of it's backed up on like stainless steel at the time. I learned very quickly I might have had all the financial sovereignty in the world. I had no geographical sovereignty because I was locked in my geographic location for 2 years when the international borders closed in Australia. And I also, at the time, didn't have enough what I'm calling entrepreneurial sovereignty. My business was subject to the whims of a government. Because at the time, they were saying, sorry, you can't have a gym or a personal training business unless you wear 3 masks and do all sorts of other things that we're mandating you do. Very quickly, I was never going to be compliant to any of that tyranny. And I was never going to be forcing any of my clients to be subjected to that tyranny. So I learned very quickly, hey, there's different aspects to sovereignty. And that's the thesis of the book, The Digital Renaissance Man. The book, The Sovereign Individual, said that there would be 100 million sovereign individuals. I think it's really interesting that we're watching 3 exponential trends unfold today. The number of Bitcoin users has grown from literally 0 to potentially hundreds of millions, depending upon how you measure it, over the past 15 years. That's an exponential trend that's going parabolic. And I believe the inflection point was 2020. Where that adoption went exponential. We're seeing something similar in geographic sovereignty. So the number of digital nomads has grown from 4 million to 35 million since 2018. So this was kind of slowly growing for 10 years. 2018, we hit an exponential tipping point, very similar to that 2020 tipping point I believe we saw in Bitcoin's adoption curve. And since then, we got 35 million digital nomads. People are leaving the West. They're sick of the taxes. They're sick of the immigration rules. They're sick of not being safe in their own country. They're sick of paying 50% taxes to be funding all sort of just, let's just call it ideologically brain dead ideas. I'm not going to try to offend a ton of different minorities, but it's just stupid the way our money has been spending. It's been spent on wars. Okay, that's a topic I can touch. I simply will not pay tax for the rest of my life. I have legally paid all the taxes that I'm supposed to owe this year, but I will not pay any further tax because I don't agree on bombing children and women in the Middle East. That's where our tax dollars are being spent. It's disgusting. So there's a lot of people, there's 35 million people who are beginning to agree with some of what I just said. They're not living in their home country, 35 million digital nomads. And then if you also have a look at the trend of people quitting the 9 to 5 and starting their own business, this has also started to go exponential in the past 10 years as well. So I believe there's 3 exponential trends, and to become fully self-sovereign, you need to have a foot in each one of those doors. So you need to have at least some of your net worth in Bitcoin, so you're financially sovereign. You need to have different options on how to be geographically sovereign. Okay, you need to also have you need to also have ways to make money that is completely outside your government's control. So that's the whole thesis of the digital renaissance, man.
Well, I think it's a book that's definitely got a big audience waiting to read it. I mean, especially now, as you said, with this hockey stick trajectory that we've seen all through trends take off. You know, a lot of people, and similar, I guess it's kind of like the book that's really contributed to people taking that leap and leaving the 9 to 5 rat race was the 4 Hour Work Week, right? Which Daniel Prince's book was highly based off with. I keep forgetting what's his book called.
Tim Ferriss.
Travel. That's the one. No, Tim Ferriss, but I'm talking about Daniel Prince's book, which was based off the 4 Hour Week, where he kind of also teaches you to kind of, build up your blueprint for traveling the world, having your side gig, but then, being free to do what you want to do. And I guess in today's world where with the internet and with Bitcoin, you can be living wherever you want. There's no more like you being tied to the government that you've been born and raised into. I think your book is something that, a lot of younger generations do need, and also older ones that are kind of sick of doing the same old thing, that want to do that leap, but don't know how to. So if I could somehow push you, Luke, to definitely in 2025, maybe set yourself a goal for next year. Don't have a hard deadline, but in 2025, I think it would be a nice time to finish that book and release it to the world, because I think that book would help a lot of people in giving them that extra urge and the right guidance on how to go forward with their lives, because a lot of people are missing out on great potential and need to have that little kick, like a lot of people have reading the Tim Ferriss book with a 4 Hour Work Week. But no pressure.
Thank you. I need the pressure. I really want to publish the book. I think I don't want to pat myself on the back too much, but I think it's a book that will help a lot of people, even outside of the Bitcoin space.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, thank you for the kick in the back. It's funny you mentioned Tim Ferriss's book. I'm actually thinking about titling it "The Second Wave of the Digital Nomading Revolution Has Just Begun," because I believe the first wave of the digital nomading revolution was inspired by Tim Ferriss with his book, The 4 Hour Work Week. But his principles and philosophy and inspiration was essential for taking us from like 0 to 4 million digital nomads. I think since we've seen this exponential kick and we've seen that number rise from 4 million in 2018 to 35 million today, there's been different factors that have driven the digital nomads leaving. And I believe that the technology as well as the political and economic environment is why we're seeing this exponential trend. So that's why I'm also considering titling the book, the second wave of the 9 to 4 has just, the second wave of the 4 Hour Work Week has just begun. Something like that. But it's just funny you mentioned that. So thank you for the kind words. I will really want to publish it the next, 3 months or so. It's nearly finished.
Well, it would be nice. And I'm looking forward to going to a future Bitcoin conference and getting your book signed by you and sharing it with the world. It would be cool. But I guess, Luke, we could have this episode going on for hours, but I want to save some juicy stuff for the next time, because like with all guests, the invitation's always open to come back on the show, because our Bitcoin journeys are only getting started. And one thing I'll bring up, which I liked what you said, you've been in the space for 7 years and you still don't understand Bitcoin, and I fully agree with you on that one. I've also been in the space for 7 years, and every day I'm learning something. Whenever you have someone that tells you they're an expert in Bitcoin, I tend to steer away, because that guy's either delusional or his ego is just way over his head, because nobody knows. Even I'm sure Adam Back is learning new things every day about Bitcoin, and this technology, we're so early in it, and the sooner you get started with it, the better off you're going to be. So I guess I'll leave it with one last question, Luke, which I ask all of my guests. What is one piece of advice you would share, Luke, to people that are yet to start their Bitcoin journey, that don't have any sats under their belt? What is one piece of advice, even though you've shared a lot of alphas in this episode, but what is it, just one, if you could take it away?
So if you're watching this and you own 0 Bitcoin, the first thing you should do is spend 10 hours learning about Bitcoin. I haven't met anyone who spent more than 10 hours learning about Bitcoin that said, yeah, you know what? It's not really that interesting. I'm sick of it. I'm bored. I'm out. I don't care. It's never met a person who spent more than 10 hours learning about Bitcoin and economics who's said, yeah, you know what? I don't care. So I think that's some really simple advice that anyone watching this who doesn't own any Bitcoin can take. I don't want to make any guarantees or give any financial advice, because we never do that here on YouTube. But I will say that I think it will make a change in your life. For me personally, learning about Bitcoin in 2017 completely changed the trajectory of my life, and honestly changed my life in ways that I sometimes just forget how big it was. So that's what I would say to anybody who doesn't have any Bitcoin. I'm not making any guarantees, but you might start thinking about things very differently if you spend 10 hours learning about Bitcoin.
Amazing. Well, there you have it, guys. I mean, 10 hours is not that long. It's like you could do that in a day, like on a lazy Sunday. If you wake up at, 10 a.m. and just spend until, 8 p.m. in the evening watching some YouTube content, you might as well have taken the orange pill deep down, and the world will never look the same. And from there on, it's just constant learning and learning and learning. But yeah, I would like to thank you again, Luke, for everything you're doing in the space. It's incredible. I'm really happy, and I hope that we have more people that will be joining us in the years to come to help and evangelize Bitcoin and be that helping hand, guidance. May you be a content creator, may you be just getting your first bag of sats, may you be some educational stuff like Ben is doing with BTC sessions, which has been doing it for a long time, setting up your nodes, doing tutorials. We need more of this content to really spread the fire of Bitcoin. And, the future is bright, and I'm very positive on the outlook of it. So once again, thank you, Luke, for all the incredible work you're doing with the live streams, with the dedication, with the 3 channels. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor having you on. And yeah, I very much look forward to our next episode with you. Who knows, will BlackRock will be exposed by then or not, the paper Bitcoin? You have to wait and see. But until then, make sure to follow Luke. What is the best place to send our listeners to follow you, Luke?
The best place, I apologize, one of the microphones died that I had right here. I'm trying to
Proof of
charge
work.
trying to charge it with my little case, but it's completely dead. So anyway, I apologize about that. The best place to follow me, if you want to tell me I'm crazy or I have a shit haircut, you can do that on Twitter. My handle is Luke Mikic 21. I accept all your hate mail, as Greg Foss used to say. So send it all my way. And if you have any questions, again, Twitter is probably easiest. I got a YouTube channel, but I get swamped in comments, so I might not see your comment there. So yeah, Twitter. And thank you so much for having me, dude. It was honestly a blast, and we do need more Bitcoin educators like yourself. So kudos on what you're doing, and I am excited to rip around 2 with you in the future.
Thank you so much, Luke. Until next time.
Adios. Muchas gracias.